Welcome to the Mockingcast, the podcast of Mockingbird Ministries. I'm David Zoll, your host, and in a few moments, I'll be joined by my co-hosts, Sarah Condon and RJ Heyman. We come to you every other week to discuss a few of the places where we currently see grace and its absence playing out in unexpected and compelling ways. We're glad to have you with us.
Praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. God.
So, did you guys survive October? How was especially that last day of October? Tell me about it. Sarah, I saw incredible pictures, but why don't you enlighten us on what the Condon family treated the world to?
So we have a deep love of Bob's Burgers, especially because it portrays a family that in their situation is a restaurant. In our situation, perhaps it is church, an institution that the whole family's all in on. They have really good days. They have some really hard days. So we watch Bob's Burgers with our kids like pretty regularly. I do want to say before season 3 is not kid friendly. It's one of these weird shows that shifted. So before you just turn on with your kids, just know that. But we were the Bob's Burgers family for our trunk or treat at the church, which is like such an interesting event because so many people come to it or aren't a part of the church. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of children. So we did like, if you're familiar with the show, we did like a burger of the day because there's always a burger of the day, and ours was something to do with fruits of the spirit. It was really sweet. It was like fruits of the spirit gummy burgers. I mean, my 11-year-old came up with it. Like the kids were, well,
a fruit burger. Come on.
I know. He was really excited. Our 8-year-old was like more reluctantly Louise, which if you know the show is like the best way to be Louise. So, she was a vampire teenager / she would wear the Louise hat to appease us. So, which was like very on brand. Anyway, it was a really sweet Halloween. It was like, I feel like we're in this just beautiful, like middle of childhood where, you know, they're pretty self-sufficient. They still want to be around us.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's really fun.
What about RJ? You guys have had a history or a tradition of pretty amazing costumes.
Family costumes.
We like to do family concept. We do. This year, Marshall wanted to be a great white shark, so he was a great white shark, and we were trying to live into that. And so we were Jaws. I was Quint, the grizzled Massachusetts fisherman, and my wife was Jaws's first victim. And so that was kind of our concept, and we had a great Halloween. I mean, how can you not have a great Halloween when you have a 6-year-old? You know, he's been talking about it for a month.
Yeah.
He ate so much candy, he got a stomach ache, which is exactly what's supposed to happen.
Yeah.
And then you get on with your life.
Yeah.
So, DZ, what about you? What did you do?
Yeah. What did you do?
Well, we were sort of we were in Texas for the never-ending low anthropology tour.
Oh, so you guys are bad parents. That's what you did for Halloween. Okay.
We were
cool.
honestly, there was like a mutiny afoot in our house. They were so upset. I said I would not miss Halloween. Of course, I would never miss Halloween. And so we were there in Halloween. We just got there sort of at 1 a.m. on Halloween. On the 31st. So we were there all day.
Okay.
And it was raining here, and you'd think that was going to put a damper on things. It did not. It was. This was the first year, though. Our 12-year-old was like, I'm going to another neighborhood with some friends, and you guys just do your own thing.
You do your thing. I'll do my thing.
So
it's
I was
all
like,
good.
that felt a little bit like the beginning of something.
Yeah.
But mainly, we have our neighborhood like really shines on Halloween, I gotta say. Though, you know, I was driving through Texas quite a bit, and trunk or treat is not really a thing here. It is, but Texas, it looks like I couldn't go. I've seen it at a few places. It felt like in Texas, I couldn't drive 2 minutes without seeing some sort of trunk or treat, advertisement. So that's interesting.
Got to sanctify those pagan holidays. You know,
there is still some regionalism, which is kind of refreshing to see.
Yeah.
Well, happy Halloween, you two. Happy All Saints Day. I know it's All Saints Sunday this coming Sunday, right? I learned something in the world of church nerdiness. I was with our friend and the co-host of the Same Old Song podcast. I was with Aaron Zimmerman at his wonderful church in Waco, and he mentioned there's a list that Episcopal churches read on All Saints Days of everyone who died in the parish in the last year, and I didn't know
The
this.
necrology.
But it's called the necrology.
You didn't know that?
Nope. And I told Paul Walker, our rector here, who's been a man of the cloth for 30 years, and he said, "What?
No.
I guess
Oh
we
my
should call it
gosh.
that." So the necrology.
The necrology. It's not about sex.
or if it is, see your therapist.
Well, anything else to report, you two?
I want to report something. Because All Saints Day, November 1st, is also my middle son's birthday, Spencer, who turned 18 this year. So I now have a 20-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 6-year-old, which is just insane.
Bold choice.
But speaking of reaching stages of life, and I can say this because he'll never listen to this podcast. We were driving in the car the other day. It was late at night. I took him to the Steelers Miami Dolphins football game as part of his birthday present.
Ooh.
And it was about
bad.
midnight. And he said, Dad, I know that you and Mom think that I resent you for moving me to Florida. Because just in case you're not a longtime listener, we moved him between his freshman and sophomore year of high school. He was very happy in Houston. Then the pandemic hit. And by the time we got out of the pandemic, he was like done with Florida and just ready to get back to Texas. He's applying to pretty much all the Texas schools. He said, I know you think that I resent you for moving me, but I don't. And it was really, really hard. But moving just showed me the relationships that are most important in my life, the things that are most important in my life. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But I actually think it was a really good thing. And so I don't resent you. And then, I don't know, we had his parent-teacher conferences yesterday, and he tells us nothing. If you have teenage boys, you can relate to this, that they tell you absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
But the degree to which his teachers love him, the work he's doing, the way that he has blossomed completely unbeknownst to my wife and me, it could have gone a lot of ways with us moving. But I'm just so proud of him and so thankful to God that he kind of sustained us and him through that time period. And as he enters adulthood as an 18-year-old, I just am kind of standing in awe of the man that he has become. Especially after sort of not really knowing what was going on in his heart and mind the last couple of years. Wow. So I just want to say how thankful I am for that. And it's a reminder again that, I don't know, I hope we've been good parents, but the importance of just that I think this message of kind of sticking in there and patience and grace and unconditional love and letting your kids go through what they need to go through and not taking it personally. And I don't know, there might be something, I hope there's something to it. So
that's amazing.
My wife and I have been crying a bit this past week over all of that. So Spencer, if you ever listen to this, I'm sorry, but that's where I'm
that's
at.
just so reassuring because middle school boys are the weirdest.
Oh my
and
Yes.
I'm just like really
Tempers.
this morning.
It's a little scary.
I mean,
it's
I'm
a little,
so glad to hear you say
yeah.
because this morning I literally said, I'm going to move my car so your dad can take you because he likes to take his car. I go outside. I'm fully in a bathrobe. Like, I'm clearly not taking you to school. And our son walks out as the car is moving.
Oh, yeah,
and
totally.
hits the window.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you doing? So he's on a plane
Temporary
right now to
hormone-induced
Florida
insanity.
because RJ and Jamie are going to raise him. Because I can't be his mom after that. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh. I concur. Sarah and I have the good fortune or something to have boys that are exact same age. And
Yeah.
let's just say that it's a whole new kettle of fish.
It's a new day every day.
It'll
my
keep you on your
goodness.
knees, that's
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of my 12-year-old, he is obsessed with baseball out of the blue.
Oh,
and
that's awesome.
Go
it's
Astros.
It's a good time to be obsessed with baseball because this is being recorded as the World Series is on. And so I'm going to read an article, but Sarah, don't glaze over. It's not really about baseball, but here we go.
Good.
Are you aware there's a Houston team in the World Series, Sarah? Are you aware of that?
You live
the
there.
person I'm married to makes me deeply aware. Okay.
Okay.
What this is by Derek Thompson in The Atlantic. It says, "What Moneyball for Everything has done to American culture." He writes this: "The return of the World Series this weekend offers an opportunity to engage in America's real national pastime, which is wondering loudly why people don't like baseball as much as they used to. Possible reasons abound. After the steroid
Continue.
scandals of the 2000s, the stars of my childhood got ceremonially berated for cheating by grumpy old dudes and blacklisted from the Hall of Fame. Kind of a bummer, to be honest. But on a deeper level, I think what happened is that baseball was colonized by math and got solved like an equation. The analytics revolution, which began with the movement known as Moneyball, led to a series of adjustments that were, let's say, catastrophically successful. Seeking strikeouts, managers increased the number of pitchers per game and pushed up the average velocity and spin rate per pitcher. Hitters responded by increasing the launch angles of their swings, raising the odds of a home run, but making strikeouts more likely as well. In other words, Smarties approached baseball like an equation, optimized for Y, solved for X, and proved in the process that a solved sport is a worst one. So there's like, in baseball, basically in the last 10 years, there's a lot less hits and a lot more strikeouts. He goes on, though, to expand. He says that the quantitative revolution in culture is a living creature that consumes data and spits out homogeneity. Take film. While the abundance of video content is fantastically diverse today, blockbuster movies look a lot like a solved equation. Now, I didn't know this. In 2019, the 10 biggest films by domestic box office included 2 Marvel sequels, 2 animated film sequels, a reboot of a 90s blockbuster, and a Batman spin-off. In 2022, the 10 biggest films by domestic box office included 2 Marvel sequels, 1 animated film sequel, a reboot of a 90s blockbuster, and a Batman spin-off. Blockbusters are kind of boring now. Not because Hollywood is stupid, but because it got so smart. So Derek says cultural moneyballism in this light sacrifices exuberance for the sake of formulaic symmetry. It sacrifices diversity for the sake of familiarity. Its genius dulls the rough edges of entertainment. But it is definitely worth asking the question, in a world that will only become more influenced by mathematical intelligence, can we ruin culture through our attempts to perfect it? Wow. By the way, he talks at length. He says, this is not, the world's not ending. This is not the...
Sure.
However, lots of people have noticed that if you want to get a movie off the ground, or if you want to get a book off the ground, if you want to get an album off the ground, you have to appeal kind of directly to sort of intellectual property or books that currently exist. Well, it's like that, but for so and so, you know.
Yeah.
It's like Daring Greatly, but for old men. You know, it's or
Would read, for the record.
that would.
Yeah.
So this formulaicism that is all statistically driven. He says it's ruined baseball. I kind of agree. There was a lot more just random crazy stuff that would happen before the age of optimization. But this optimization, the way it plays out in all sorts of other arenas, is just I see it. I feel it. RJ, you're looking quizzical.
Yeah, RJ.
I'm just trying to think
Spill
of that.
the tea.
I just have always felt that baseball's kind of boring. You
All right,
stand
RJ.
around. It's a lot of standing around. You know, like I played a little bit of baseball. My kids played a little bit of baseball, but unless you're the pitcher or the catcher or maybe the first baseman, you basically spend all your time lying around, and the games just take too long. Mm-hmm. And the reason the games take too long
complain about baseball
is because of commercials.
Think about the wider point, though. Here, do you see?
Yes,
if there's anything you have to say
I'm
about the
trying to
moneyballism
think
of
about
culture,
I get the optimization point. I get it, and I do agree with him that there's much less pull to go see the latest block. Like I'm kind of sick of superhero movies. I just am. Like
which
they're
is wild.
awesome.
Yeah.
Like they actually the Marvel Cinematic Universe has produced some amazing films. and I'm really bored of it.
Yeah.
Like, isn't there something else? I mean, Maverick was incredible, but it was a reboot of a 90s franchise. You know, there's also, I mean, Maverick was better than it had any right to be. Let's just say that. So there's room for creativity. Yeah, I don't know. Baseball's boring. I'm just going to say it. So,
Super.
And there's too many commercials, which is why I advocate for European sports, because if you watch a soccer game
Connecticut,
or
come on.
or
Yeah,
a
because
Formula One race.
soccer's not boring at all. I just
No, but you know the best thing about soccer? It can be very
Kidding.
boring. But you know
Can
the
be-
best thing about it?
What?
There's no commercials. It's over in an hour and a half. It's done. You watch a football game, it's 4 hours long.
It is,
It's
yeah.
insane.
It is
It's
insane.
insane. All right. Sarah, as the resident sports
Yes,
lover.
as a sports editor of
Yes.
Mockingbird, I actually really love baseball because I understand it, and I don't understand football.
Okay. It's
And
impossible to understand.
I'm not gonna watch soccer because I'm from America. So
World Cup is coming up, but you didn't know that.
I mean, my best friend's family growing up were like big St. Louis Cardinals fans, and so while I didn't grow up with any baseball, that was like, you know, is it Mark McGuire or somebody?
Yes, totally.
Yeah, like I remember like sort of that being in my world when I was little.
Slam and Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, and Sammy Sosa. I remember those names. So,
Albert Pujols.
I mean,
Delino DeShields.
I just want to say I was today years old when I realized that
Ozzie Smith.
Moneyball means like making more money from baseball. Yeah. So that just clicked in my brain. So I don't know that I have a lot to add. I mean,
It's a movie.
yeah, I mean, there's less. Sure, it's like how no one has Southern accents anymore, a little bit, right? Because the optimal way to talk is without a Southern accent. I mean, yes, this is like happening, like, you know, in every way, shape, and form.
The flattening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see like what does the baseball history and story mean for us now that it is so optimized. I mean, you're right, Dave. Like I know enough to know we've seen 2 games where it was 0, you know, something. And Josh and I watched that game a couple weeks ago that was just 0-0 until like the 18th inning or something.
Yeah.
That's commitment.
Yeah. Oh, we're all in. We will watch baseball. And I mean, if you get tired, it's very quiet and green and you can just take a nap on the couch. So I love that. But it makes me think about where this is headed, but then it's like, okay, well, where is this headed in a broader way? Like, what does it mean that everything gets flat? You know?
Yeah, there's another article this week that said that the genre of film that is proven to be most durable in the sort of new media streaming box office kind of, you know, transition that's been so awkward that's kind of, a lot of people say it's just these huge blockbusters and then an independent film and small like rom-coms, you know, they're just done kind of, or to the extent that they exist, like there's a new rom-com coming out starring guess who? George Clooney opposite Julia Roberts. It's like those are the same people who were starring in our rom-coms 25 years ago. And like, that's a little strange that we haven't gotten a new, I guess, like, you know, 500 Days of Summer was a great sort of somewhat more modern. I guess it's 15 years old now.
I was like, that's an old movie, baby.
Yeah, I know. But is horror movies tend to be less reliant on existing IP. Like, yes, they're franchises, but for the most part, you can make a cheap horror movie and people will go see it. And it's just, to me, that's really interesting that has proven somewhat immune to this flattening. It's also dealing with like people love horror right now because they're surrounded by situations that are somewhat horrific and want to think about how would I react in such and such a thing.
Horror's also never going to have like mass market appeal in the way that because certain people just aren't going to go watch a slasher movie.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it's the most profitable part of the movie business outside of the Marvel universe.
That's fascinating.
And so that's, to me, is interesting. And, you know, we've got some of our best writing on our website, by the way, is about horror. And we have 2 horror experts in Ian Olson and Blake Collier, and they just put up something called 6 Spooky Novels to read this Halloween, which is
cool.
It's really, really great. It's not the usual suspects. They always have like interesting takes on what, you know, because horror to me I find it generally soaked in Christian imagery and religious imagery. There's a lot of good and evil. and the stakes are high. It's so I get that some people don't like it, but when it comes to baseball, I love baseball. I don't watch baseball because for the exact reasons he talks about. But what I like about baseball is the sort of, when I was a kid, the Mets were the biggest thing in my life. Aww. I've got Mets figures behind me that you guys can see actually if you're right here. Starting lineup. But I just watched a Nolan Ryan documentary, and I just thought to myself, there's a couple different things about it. I think that these characters, these old ball players, are all just like the most colorful guys. And they're all like, you saw Dave Winfield talking to George Brett, and they're just like cracking jokes. You watch stuff about old football players, and they're all brain damaged. They can't.
I know.
They
I was
can't
just
talk.
gonna say, yeah, they don't. Yeah,
That is
they
true.
haven't been traumatized physically.
The old golfers are all sort of drunk, but it's like the baseball players have these stories that are just insane, and they're woven in the fabric of America. Now I get the fact that that's going to be less and less the case, but we will have lived through an era, I think, where the history of baseball, that Ken Burns stuff, does tell something larger, and it was a story for us all to get wrapped up into. And a kind of a redemptive story. If you're trying to weave a cultural narrative, like, there are worse ways to do it than with baseball. But the flattening, I think, by the way, is a net loss. I thought that it was cool to be in Texas and see all these trunk or treats and things. Say, hey, we don't have that in Virginia. Regional difference is interesting. I don't want to live in a monoculture, but... Well, all right. Let's move on.
Sports segment done.
You can relax.
Really?
6 months
Should we not
for
go
our next
on?
one.
Sarah, you will have nothing to say about this next one. This was also in The Atlantic by Michael Waters. It's called The Decline of Etiquette and the Rise of Boundaries. Dun, 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 dun. Boundaries. Big story here. For centuries, strict social norms dictated what people could talk politely about, and consequently how much they knew one another, even those closest to them. Yet by the close of the 20th century, conversational taboos were falling away. Etiquette manuals had lost their cultural cachet. Sexuality was being more openly discussed, and books such as Prozac Nation that dealt frankly with mental illness were trailblazing a new, raw form of memoir. In 2022, the idea that we should carefully control what personal information we share and take in might seem outdated, even dystopian. Or maybe it doesn't. Today, a disconcerting question seems to be on many people's mind. Do we know too much about those around us? Advice columnists are fielding questions about how to protect against overshares, as well as what constitutes TMI in the first place. TikTokers are accusing their peers of divulging life details to the point of, quote, trauma dumping. As society-wide norms have loosened, individuals have taken on the burden of navigating their own boundaries, and it isn't always easy. The result, it seems, is a new backlash against oversharing. More and more, people seem eager to reinstall some boundaries. Online, new privacy features, such as Instagram's close friends, restrict the reach of certain posts so that only a pre-selected group will see them. Users no longer have to risk their aunt learning about their shroom trip. Meanwhile, many workers are realizing that they don't want to bring, quote, their whole self to the office at all. We talked about that a few weeks ago. This desire for emotional distance is even trickling into intimate friendships. In 2019, a relationship coach tweeted that anyone should feel empowered to turn down friends who ask for support. She suggested the following response: "I'm so glad you reached out. I'm actually at capacity. I don't think I can hold appropriate space for you." End of quote. It became a meme, and people clearly thought it was funny. But he closes, "In an era of instant, abundant communication, how do you step back when you're feeling overwhelmed? If it feels like there isn't a clear answer, that's because we've left behind the era of strict, clear etiquette. We're entering a new one in which the rules are bespoke and the arbiters are each and every one of us." Reminds me of this Reductress article that said, "New Barbie showcases a doll whose whole thing is boundaries."
Oh my gosh.
I thought it was
so good.
was funny.
You know, I think a lot about the way I was raised. I mean, I've talked about this before, but that we were like the blue dot just our house was the blue dot in the red state. It felt like a lot politically, and that my parents were really active politically, and somehow they managed to read the room, and their friends managed to read the room, and they were in deep and meaningful relationships with a lot of people that they didn't agree with politically, and how we've just lost that, you know? And because it's like we all have to, like, our only identity now is in our opinions. And so we have to share them all the time with everyone. And if people don't agree with them, then, you know, then they're off our friend list or whatever. I don't know. I think there's a lot I think there's got to be an overlap actually to oversharing and division on some level. That's really interesting. Yeah. I mean, it makes me think of a thing a therapist told me one time, just because, you know, I had someone in my life who was like really sharing a lot about their marriage. And I said, I'm really uncomfortable and I don't know how to handle this. And my therapist, it was such a great illustration, but she's like, there's a circle in a marriage and the husband and the wife or whoever, you know, are standing in the middle of it, whoever's married. And then there's a ring beyond that, let's say, and that's like, maybe that's their kids or that's their parents or whatever. And then there's one beyond that, you know, that kind of thing. And she basically said, this person has pulled you through all of those rings into the center to tell you information that, like, you shouldn't have to know. And it was such a helpful illustration, I think, for what happens on the internet every day. Like, we just pull everyone through those rings right into our marriage or right into our relationship with our children, or, you know, I mean, it makes me, because we don't have etiquette for the internet, like, one thing that I always find really disturbing is when people will put up pictures of children and they'll say, you know, and typically they do this if it's like an embarrassing thing or a confessional thing, you know, whatever. Susie, you know, made a mess in the kitchen and we had a hard talk and I explained to her, and now, you know, it's like kind of thing. And then they'll write at the bottom of it, like, posted with Susie's permission. And it's like, girl, Susie's 6. She does not know what it means to give you permission to post this stuff. And so there's no etiquette. There's no etiquette in our interpersonal relationships, but there is like, you know, opposite of etiquette on the internet. And I'm someone who really sort of hates the word etiquette. You know, I wasn't raised with people. It's so funny. My parents, you know, I didn't do cotillion. I didn't do any of that stuff that was very typical of girls in Mississippi. And yet there was like an understood etiquette, I guess, that like that I miss.
Interesting. Well, RJ, what's
I don't feel like I hardly know anything about anybody. Like it seems contradictory to me. Like maybe
not on social media that much, right?
Maybe that's the thing, that people are oversharing on social media. But again, social media isn't real. And like, does anyone share anything with anyone in their actual lives? Like, where's the boundary between like etiquette and loneliness? Like, maybe the reason people are broadcasting everything on social media is because they're so darn lonely and they don't have anyone who knows them or anyone who listens to them or any close friends or any intimacy with anybody. So they have to go on social media and kind of vomit it out. But I'm consistently surprised when I get to know people how little I know about them. And then I find something out, and I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Well, I don't know if people are. I think there's like a very clear etiquette about what it is appropriate to share. I do think that people are well aware of like that's at least if you're trying to gain approval or likes, you share enough stuff to feel like you've shared without actually sharing anything that painful. I mean, how many times are we actually surprised by like someone makes an announcement about a divorce on social media and like, well, I had no idea, you know, but they've been so open and vulnerable about so many things, quote unquote vulnerable, but you don't actually know what's really going on. So I think that, and I think the loneliness is correlated to that. I think Helena Diabala talked about, who wrote Craigslist Confessional, who's speaking for us in New York this year. She said people are sharing a lot, but they're sharing the wrong sorts of things. I'm reminded of two things. I think again about what I talked about last episode, where Stephen Paulson said that we're sort of always looking to confess. We're burdened by life and by our conscience, and we're looking to confess. And sort of we're going around trying to find someone to answer us with a word of affirmation and a word of absolution, and we don't really get that anywhere, so we keep looking, and it just is. That's what it often feels like to be alive today. It's just a confession in need of an absolution. But I think I do notice the increase in talk about boundaries in a way that I know that I'm prone to sort of needing to, I give and give and give, and then I sort of say, okay, that's enough. I need a boundary now, and I need to stop. And self-care is a lot about boundaries, that whole sort of movement. And I find Christians talking about boundaries all the time in a way that is a little dissonant, because I just don't. Yes, Jesus withdrew to pray sometimes, but I don't think he had boundaries in terms of like what he was able to take on in terms of sin or shame or something like that. And there's a little bit of like we use religious language to justify wanting to not serve other people or just
Totally.
And
he never said,
we all have our limits.
Time for you.
He never said, I don't have time for you. He never said, I don't have the space for you right now. If anything, he did withdraw, he did rest, but he also never turned people away. And that's a important thing. So I'm conflicted about this, but I do talk about in the book, in Low Anthropology, I talk about the courtesy being actually a fruit of low anthropology, because courtesy is based on the understanding that in some sense, you and I need a little bit of guardrails in order to love one another well, and that you need to be protected from me and I need to be protected from you in order to sort of actually approach loving you with any kind of efficacy. And so courtesy is basically, I don't dump immediately everything. That frankness, complete gut-level truth-telling can be a way of inflicting myself on another person in a way that I can't handle when they do it to me. So courtesy is usually a bit of an allowance for the fact that we all have kind of rough edges. And in order to love and get along and grease the wheels of society, I need a little bit of a buffer before I can really enter into caring for you. If I have to deal with the full reality of everyone all the time, that does create a situation of like I want to run screaming for the hills. So like. And today, I think with the very idea that you would withhold some part of your personality, it sounds like, oh, don't censor me, you don't accept me, but you sort of want to say, well, actually, I want to have a better chance at loving you, so that I don't get completely overwhelmed by your need, or you by mine. So maybe that's just a rationalization, but I think there's something to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the boundaries thing is like a really popular thing to talk about now, and I think it probably is just us grasping at some sort of like cultural norm because we don't have them.
Yeah, that's kind of what's being said in the piece.
Yeah, but I don't know. I just feel like we're all like building it's not even a plane. We're like building like the cheap kid drone while we're flying it, but we're actually on the drone. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just feel like it's all, I don't know.
What's a little like going to a wedding where someone feels like they have to invent their entire cosmology from the ground up, because they've got, and that's a bit, it sounds like freedom, but it's actually a huge burden in a lot of ways. It's a huge
burden. Yeah.
A little bit of etiquette might go a long way sometimes. RJ?
I was going to say, I do have friends that I feel like I can be fairly filterless with, and maybe, I don't know, I'm not young, I'm not old, I'm kind of in between. Maybe I've learned to censor myself a little bit out of concern for others, but I do have a few friends that I feel like I can sort of let it all hang out with. And I just wonder how many people don't have a friend like that, like don't have someone they can actually talk to, who's there for them, who will pick up the phone, who will listen to them. And this need to overshare on social media is like, hello, I'm here, like recognize my existence, and someone love me. Please, just someone recognize that I'm here. And that if more people had just someone a friend who was willing to, who just loved them, who loved them enough to be willing to put up with their stuff. And sometimes also like intimacy is built through sharing stuff. Sometimes, when you have a friend who calls you and dumps on you, sometimes it's a burden. Sometimes it's an honor. Sometimes it's like, wow, you love me enough to actually tell me what's going on. And to me, that's the sadness is, maybe it's an etiquette thing, but I feel like it's a loneliness thing. I feel like it's a desperation thing, the oversharing.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I feel like this conversation's really gendered.
Okay.
Really?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I love what you're saying, RJ, and I hope everybody has that. And I mean, related, not related. I just read today a statistic that the number of men under the age of 30 who've never had sex has tripled recently. So but again, I feel like this is a little bit of a gendered conversation. I feel like men lack a lot of intimacy in their relationships, and I kind of sometimes feel like women have too much. So,
well, it's certainly
know.
Reductress is always talks about sort of, satirical news feminized, and the female friend who's always talking about boundaries is like a thing. It's an archetype right now.
Oh, totally.
Among women, my wife is always telling me, it's like, well, I just so and so decided they need boundaries this week, and then next week they won't, and we'll see what happens. It's this, or they feel like they're there's that Amy Schumer skit where like everyone is sort of trying to up each other in terms of self-deprecation. Well, I'm just the worst person that's ever lived, and like not only do my kids haven't eaten in a week, like they're the worst. One of them just cut off his right arm. And there's a little
race to the bottom.
There's a sense of which like boundaries. In that situation, she always feels like boundaries is a way of sort of not allowing yourself to be completely run over in a way that I think some women have been told that's okay, and I don't think it is okay. But I also know that like I don't want boundaries from God. I don't want boundaries. It
is hilarious when people are like, and Jesus stepped away because he needed a nap and a firm boundary. And I'm like, is that what happened?
It's like when people say, well, we were at this Tyler conference this week, and Tish Warren was asked about people using their prophetic voice, and she said like she gets a little wary of people talking about Jesus turning over the tables. She's like, that happened. It did happen. But it happened once. And it happened once. And he got killed a week later. So and she said,
so you do the math.
Be very careful about using that as a justification for anything. He had some skin in the game, shall we say.
Yeah.
So Sarah, can you say more clearly what you're trying to say? Or are you scared of the hate mail you're going to receive? Or do you just feel like there's more of a tendency among, I hate to say, women to just share in a way that is insensitive and I don't know, burdensome to others?
I mean, I think that is in some ways like, please don't send me an email. I think that is in some ways biological. Dave is biting his fingernails so much right now. He's like, oh,
what is
God.
she going to say?
Do I forward these emails or do I not?
Say what you think.
I feel, okay, so like historically we're in the village, we're at we're at our little houses, we're cooking, we're cleaning, we're gossiping, right? We're sharing, we're doing these things. And I think that is like very much a part of like female community. Like it's like when we're all in a public bathroom together and somebody needs help with their hair or a tampon, we all are like, hey, we're here. Let us help you. Like that is something that's like very normal in female culture and really beautiful. Like that's one of my favorite parts of being a lady, honestly. And also like that meets social media and this ravenous desire to get followers and to get people to pay attention to you and to probably, yes, RJ, yes. I mean, women are lonely too, to meet your loneliness. And this really beautiful thing that is sort of like communal comfort and sharing can become really, really, I don't like to say toxic because people aren't poison, but can become really dangerous.
I have noticed when Jamie,
Trauma
I'm
dumping.
always
Damaging.
shocked
Trauma
when
dumping.
Jamie has a friend or when she's made a new friend, like that friend will like text her every day or someone's call every day. And I'm like,
Yes.
what? Like, what?
Yes.
Like, there's
Yeah.
nobody I talk
Yes.
to every day. It's so.
Yeah. And I have a handful
That's
of friends that like I
crazy
do that
to
with
me.
every day, and I love them
That's
so
crazy to
much.
me.
And then we'll also talk on the phone. Like we're always just. I
That's
love that,
wild.
So like when you say like I don't know your stuff about friendship, like that feels very
All right,
male to
fair
me.
enough.
So
Well,
I don't know.
I'm a,
Well, it is true, though. It is.
I'm almost a male.
men are-
This close.
so
This
close.
There's something, and again, I don't really care if it's inborn or socialized. I think it's the truth. I have, I spent 15 years editing a website, and it was the challenge, broadly speaking, was to with not every time, but female writers, I would try to get them to take out 20% of the personal pronouns, and male writers, I would try to get them to add in 20% more of add some more of yourself into this. It's just a head game or cerebral, and sometimes with the ladies, it'd be like challenge you to try to just take one step back so we don't feel like we're inside your diary. It's like it's this. And again, I don't know if it's socially,
Right.
I don't want to hate letters either, but I did notice
Right.
that was the pattern, and it changed. I definitely know dudes who would vomit all over the page, and you'd be like, I can't publish this. And I knew ladies who would just be so in the clouds that you'd want to, shout at them like, we're down here, it was something.
But 80% of the time,
80%.
it was pretty predictable as to what. I mean, I think that's.
Yeah.
I think that's true. So.
Well, let's talk.
Send your hate letters to RJ.
Send your hate letter to RJ. He's almost a man.
Just
That's going to be the title of this episode.
Almost
100%.
Almost a man.
This next article is a first person, but it's beautifully written by Catherine Jeser Morton, who we've quoted on here before. Part of her newsletter for The Cut. It's called "Say Hi to Your Ghosts for Me," and it's about the phenomenon known as being an adult orphan. I first heard the term adult orphan used by the author Samantha Irby, whose parents died when she was a teenager. That feels like a legitimate kind of orphanhood where you wonder how a person made it all by themselves. My orphanhood, her parents are both dead, feels fake and embarrassing. Can a 40-year-old really call themselves an orphan? There really isn't anything in life more precedented than parents dying, is there? The very idea of adult orphanhood is stolen valor. Children are orphans. It feels a bit like grasping for something on which to hang your hat in the absence of any character that you've earned yourself. Not only do we live in a spiritual vacuum that precludes any real philosophical entanglement with mortality, but
Whoa, just that sentence.
but when we do confront death, we make it into a special badge of identity, like a bumper sticker. Adult orphan on board.
Buying it.
But then again, I feel like a piece of space trash since my mother died. Errant and signalless. I'm an only child in an adult's body, and having no living parents causes severe vertigo sometimes. There's no one to dutifully call when I've gotten home safe from a trip. One way, she goes on to talk about the way that the go-to response we talk about death on social media is usually surprise, even though nothing is more surprising than death. But she said another way grief is processed on social media is with the increasingly popular reminder that, quote, grief is not linear. I see it everywhere, resonating like a desperate plea. Please, people, stop thinking of grief as linear. We are in constant need of this reminder because linear thinking plays a big part in how we conceive of our lives. Our careers progress, our children grow, we chart our goals and accomplishments at leisure and work. We tick items off our bucket lists. We compare our progress to where we were this time last year. None of this takes death's inevitability into account. And when death comes, we are unprepared for its elliptical influence on our lives. The death of a parent makes you a child again, but also an elder, and you keep going back and forth between those two states, possibly until you yourself die. Grief sends us off a cliff, pumping our legs into thin air like the roadrunner. Grief is not linear, and neither is love, nor joy, nor work, but we've managed to wrestle everyday survival into a series of units and badges, so now we experience our lives that way. There is comedy at the core of grief. Losing my parents was like having the house lights come up on a play that I had thought was real life.
So good.
Suddenly, I became aware of a whole crew of people, technicians, stage managers, who'd been putting on the whole thing. I had taken it all for granted and assumed it would just keep on going all around me. There's nothing left to do but laugh sometimes. She closes by saying, families are infuriating, and one of the things about not having much of one left is that they exist only in your head, which for some people might seem ideal. While our parents are alive, they are doing things that we have no choice but to react to. Sometimes they're making demands on us that we resent. Sometimes they're letting us down by not really knowing us. Dead parents don't do any of this, which is the upside. The downside is everything else.
It's also good. That last bit is like, I told you this was such a relief to me because that's the thing I think about a lot as, you know, we have parents who have medical issues or aging or just annoying, you know, at certain moments as every parent is. And, you know, that's just gone for me, right? Like, I don't have to worry about Christmas and where I'm going to be. I don't have to worry about Thanksgiving, really. I mean, I'm going to be with family, but where I'm going to be because no one cares. You know, I mean, I last Christmas plans changed in a couple of different ways because of COVID. And I remember telling my husband, you know, as the firstborn daughter, everything always ran around me. And I was the one with kids. I was the one who was married. And now nothing does. And it was just so helpful to see that in print, Dave. I'm really grateful for her writing and grateful that you included this. I wonder what RJ's thinking, because I know you've lost your dad. I know. You know, because the other thing I do want to say about that is like also there's weird relief there, which I just usually just say in the guises of therapy, but there's deep pain. I want them back more than anything else. And also I'm not going to go through Alzheimer's with my mom. I'm not going to go, you know what I mean? Like that's real. Right. And so it's a really, you know, it's hard. It's all very hard.
Yeah. RJ, what are you going to say? We're here.
I don't ever think about my dad.
Wow. Okay. That's honest.
I just don't. And like this whole idea that he was somehow, I mean, I know he loved me. I know he was proud of me. But this idea that he's like behind the scenes, like working things together, like, no. Yeah. I was on my own, you know, and he communicated that in lots of different ways. I love my mother. I'm a guy. I'm just going to say I'm a man. So maybe there's something having to do with my barely malehood that has to do with how I feel about my parents. But I just don't know what to say. I didn't grieve his passing, and maybe I will someday, and I haven't. I feel like I try hard in some ways to not be the father that he was to my children in terms of how I provide for them and what I communicate to them. And I also recognize that in some ways I'm as ambitious as he was. I'm as people-pleasing as he is. I've ended up moving my kids almost as much as he moved me, even though I sort of swore I never would. You know, that all the qualities that made it difficult for him to be my father, as a business person, he was a businessman, I've imported probably into my ministry. You know?
Sure.
So I wrestle with that. Like I so much of me is him. But I hardly ever think about him. Like my mom texted me and my brothers, and they were divorced, and my mom's amazing, on his birthday. Just been like your father would have been X number of years today. And I was like, that would have never in a million years occurred to me if you did not text me that. You know? So I'm just gonna be honest. And
no, I think that's so. I mean, you know,
my oldest son wept at his funeral. You know, and I think in some ways he maybe had a closer, like they experienced more of his love and favor than I did, which is healing. Yeah, you know, I'm grateful for that.
Yeah,
yeah.
And we're given the gift. In being people who lost parents at this age, we are given the gift of actually understanding their legacy for our children. And so, when there are hard things that come up for me about my childhood, because I had a complicated childhood, like everyone has a complicated childhood, I really hesitate to overshare any of those things with my children, because at this point, like, their legacy is their legacy, and I want it to be really positive and loving for our kids. But yeah, I mean, we're as I'm sitting here, there's like ashes, a cactus, several candles, a Dia de los Muertos skeleton, and flowers, because there's an ofrenda in my house because it's All Saints, it's, thin places, all these things, right? And it's right here where my kids eat. So for me, it's like super, super, for our family, it's super present. I mean, when we decorated for Halloween, our 8-year-old asked if we could have a graveyard in the front yard, and she wanted to write their names on tombstones.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's very...
she'd be more comfortable with that than like a lot of the adults, of course.
I know, and it's also just like how to make the rectory look weirder, so...
Sorry, that's like, really true, though. I mean, everyone would be like, this is gone beyond.
We can't... Everyone's mad about our landscaping, Annie. We can't make it work. You know what I mean? So I found a blow up with headstones, and that made her really happy. But yeah, I mean, I took a lot of comfort in this article, but RJ, everyone, not everyone would.
Well, what I love about this article is when she says there's an insistence that grief is not linear, and it's not. And she, by the way, affirms that. She's like, it's not linear. It is not linear. It is elliptical. It is cyclical. There is no and I guess it's part of a misunderstanding of a Kubler-Ross about the 5 stages being a hierarchy. She's more trying to. We've talked about this before. It's more trying to name different phases people find themselves into, perhaps cyclically. I don't know, but I think that she blames capitalism, in this kind of signally type way for being the reason why we think of stuff, everything in terms linearly, in terms of progress, that ladders. But those, by the way, predate capitalism. I think like while it's perhaps exacerbated by the way we think of everything being a growth mindset, and I get from here to there, X to Z, and then you have something like grief or love, which simply does not operate according to a ladder growth linear mindset. And she's basically saying basically the most important things in life do not operate that way. And as a Christian, I think that that's 100% true. I think that the deeper truth about life is that we're not just people getting better and growing incrementally every year. That's a fiction. That is totally a fiction. And that's one of the when I go around talking about low anthropology, part of this is about, that's part of the lie that gets told in the American church, is that you become a Christian, then you're becoming a better Christian every day in every way. And then when you get to be, you've been in the church for 25 years and yet you still have, maybe you did experience some kind of victory over something, but then it kind of boomerangs back on you. Like people see oh, well, it was all a lie. Or you could say, well, maybe these things are cyclical and that we don't operate according to some mappable trajectory of growth, that things are much more, the whole life of the believer is one of confession and absolution. And sanctification is much more a sense of getting used to your justification rather than climbing a ladder.
And maybe your brokenness is a gift, that intended for compassion towards other people. But anyway,
so I think she's hit on. It's a deeply true thing that death and grief reveal, but you don't have to be in the grieving process to know that that's true. That the nature of life is sort of death and resurrection, and things don't always progress in a manageable, gameable, moneyballable way. But I need to get from here to there, and I'm a person in grief who needs to be a person who's not in grief anymore. And I think grief, given, as she keeps saying, like, there's nothing more precedented and less surprising than the fact that your parents will die. If that's true, then that's the normal state of things. And the aberrant, the non-abnormal way of things is this idea that we all live happily ever after and no one ever dies. Like, that's the fiction that we sort of are punctured and brought into something approaching wisdom or depth, or maybe just the actual reality. So I appreciate that about it, as someone who's not in active grief. And RJ, when my dad dies, I'm going to be
I
an
know,
absolute
of course you
mess.
will.
And
So's RJ,
and
by the
you're
way.
going to hear all about it. So, and Sarah, you too. So just get ready. It's a long way off.
I mean, I don't know. It's important that we acknowledge, because we acknowledged when Luke Bird died, Chad Bird's son, and his Chad's father died in the past few days of a massive heart attack. And Chad's a part of our community, and for us at Mockingbird, that's more than just like a brand. Like, we really love and care about each other and pray for each other. And we have a firm understanding that comes from this theology that has been, salvific for me, that suffering is the only way. That's just how it happens. Like, you suffer, and that's the only way sanctification happens. And I love what you just said. You just rattled it off, Dave, but the bit about like suffering, sanctification, and that's how we understand our justification, right, through Christ.
We say this given the fact that I kind of chose this not only because it came up, but because this is All Saints Sunday that we're about to preach, where we talk about where we read the necrology.
The necrology.
But before we get to that, the other side of the All Saints is not just those who've died, but their children. Jane Grizzle wrote another wonderful piece for Mockingbird called Pumpkins, Unicorns, and Saints of God. And she talks about going to Sunday school as a kid and hearing a lot about guarding your heart from sin, and that she was very sensitive and said that her mind was hyper vigilant and latched on to those sorts of warnings or brimstone, basically the law, much more than she did the gospel. But she says this. She says, the lessons of guarding ourselves against sin meant my mind was filled with anxiety about how evil I was, with little consolation of grace. What did stay with me, though, when I got older from Sunday school, were the verses and songs from my early Sunday school days. God is so good, God is so good, God is so good, He's so good to me. Cast your cares upon Him, for He cares for you. Jesus loves me, this I know. I cannot throw the basket of harm done by Sunday school. I cannot throw out the basket of harm done by Sunday school, lest I also throw out that flannel baby. All the good gospel truths I learned there too. Then she shifts to saying, as a parent, I am more cautious than my peers when it comes to church and Sunday school. I certainly stay away from any who claim to convert my children, and definitely avoid any who teach them about the end times. While I am grateful for the good messages I heard, I am even wary of churches that try to teach responsibility, patience, or justice. I remember the weight of those lessons, and I am hesitant to sign my children up for a similar dissonant theology. Then she talks about, what it's like to be in children's ministry, because she's involved in this through Storymakers. She says the statistics around pastor burnout are dismal. Children's pastors are not immune to the fatigue. Barna just released a study that 56% of children's ministry leaders agree that children's ministry is often forgotten by their church. Yet if we truly welcome the newly baptized into the church, as my church congregation promised last week to do for a baby, then we have to take their attendance and attention as seriously as we do adults. Not because it will ensure they continue in their faith, or because this is the age when their values are formed, but because they are fully integrated members of the body of Christ, and as such need to hear the gospel just as much as we adults do. Children first experience the feeling of shame before or around the age of 2. Guilt is more complex because it has to do with empathy and understanding others, but most children experience the feeling of guilt before or around age 6. The gospel, the good news of God's mercy and love for His children, speaks to emotions and experiences our kids are already having. Jesus said, let the little children come to me. Not teach the children to obey me and then they can come, or give them lessons about the right moral way to live and then they can come. No, Jesus welcomed children as readily, or maybe more readily, than He welcomed adults. As a mother, I can think of nothing better to teach my children. The gospel delivers a refreshing word to parents and children's ministries. You cannot control or program your children. Moralization of the message may work for a while until it doesn't. What will remain is the truth of the gospel, the words of comfort, the songs of love, and the promises of God's mercy and grace. What do you think about that?
So good.
I think it's beautiful. It's very interesting to me that to see children as fully formed and in need of hearing that God loves them. Developmentally, I wonder about what she says is so interesting about children feeling guilt by the age of 6, and I'm sure there's no hard and fast rule about that, but it certainly, we think that Sunday school is for moral formation. And I don't know, I think Jane is very, very wise to say that kids need love and assurance just like adults do. I don't know.
Also, like, school is chock full of moral formation.
School is...
Do you know what I mean? Like,
these
there seems
days,
to be this anxiety. Yeah. And it's like, oh no, they're getting plenty of it. Like, I saw a video the other day that was for Samson and Delilah. And it was like the takeaways, they like tell the story. It's like this video series on YouTube. They tell the story. It's these two guys with fun voices, and there's a cartoon, and they say, so the takeaway here is Samson made friends with bad people, and you should be careful who your friends are. And I was like, what? The F word? Like, I just like, I mean, it was so, I was watching it actually with our 6th grader, and he leaned over to me as soon as they said that. He's like, I bet you don't like this. Because,
he said that?
like,
wow.
Yeah, because he knows, like, because he hears the gospel at home. He hears the gospel. I mean, we use story makers, like, he hears it, right? So he knows, right, that, like, the driving point of that story is not about Samson. It's about God and God's faithfulness to Samson, even though when the thing happened to Samson's hair that wasn't supposed to happen, that wasn't supposed to happen. God was still faithful. God still rescued. Like, that's the whole story. And also, like, it literally physically pains me to hear that stuff in children's curriculum, because some kids walk in and they feel like the bad kid.
It's very interesting to me, is like talking about, I've gotten this question a lot on the road about low anthropology and little kids, and like, do we need to tell kids that they're needy and broken and in need of mercy? And Jane is certainly talking about a God who is full of grace and mercy, and yet when you get these lessons that are all about protecting you from sin and
bad people,
and you were all of the protecting you from the evil inside you, without the even louder voice of God loves you and you can run to him in the middle of this. Yes. But I also think, like I always say, like I quote Anne Lamott and her words about how we're all broken, clingy, needy, and scared, and don't compare your insides to other people's outsides. And I always watch the adults are like, yes, that's so great. But then I say, well, if my 4th grader came home and said, hey, Dad, guess what I learned at school today? I'm broken, clingy, scared, and needy. I'd be like, what? No, you're great. I love you. There's a slight stage of life component to it. That I sure. do. Sarah, you've always told me that, like, your parents brought you to church because they wanted there to, how do you say it? They wanted
me to have something to
fall back on.
Like, it's hard.
And I think that you give kids something to fall back on when you give them not a place of fear, but a place of assurance and grace and mercy. And God is Jesus loves me, this I know. I don't know. RJ, what do you tell your children's ministers? How do you deal with this? What do you've got there were a ton of kids when I was at your church. You must be doing something like either terribly wrong
for
or
children,
right.
Exists to give parents a little bit of a break to worship and think about their lives and maybe reconnect to God and each other. Like just taking, giving the parents a little bit of quiet, focused spiritual worship time is huge. And then for kids, I think it should mainly be fun. Be a little bit of program and a lot of fun. The first thing I tell my children minister to do, as soon as you get the kids out, the first thing they're doing is they're going to play at the playground. They're getting something sugary to eat, and they're going straight to the playground to run around for about 15 minutes. And if they don't want to run around, then there's some little craft or art project they can do instead of run around. But before you do any teaching at all, it's running around. And then it's a little bit of singing for kids that like to do that. Then it's a little bit of teaching, and then it's more fun, and it's back into church. I think that's mainly what it is. And what you're trying to do is just communicate God's love through word, but most importantly through action and through them feeling like you love them and they are loved independent of anything that they do or don't do. I will say though, I gotta say there's in parenting, there's a place for guilt because kids mess up just like parents do. But there is a place for repentance in humanity, like I think, yeah.
And you're his parent. You're not God.
No, I'm not God. I'm not
Jesus.
God.
Like,
That's right. And there's a place that,
there's
if you're going to be,
that.
we say to him was like, hey, dude, we love you, but we want you to have friends and to for people. And if you're going to have people are not going to be around you if you are acting like that. And if you hit things every time you get angry. And if we love you. So we need to anyway.
I think clearly parenting versus catechesis or whatever is not always the same thing. I do think about our experience as youth ministers though, RJ, and I was at a time in my life where I was sort of perhaps not overstating the grace of God, but really
you were aggressively
you might say
it's a stage we go through,
pharisaical about anti-Phariseeism.
Yes.
And I did this. I mean, I feel like I had a lot of students who I loved, and I was the one who sort of let them off the hook, never asked them to do anything. I sort of thought that being gracious was never even asking them to be respectful, and kind of making that distinction. And then they would always joke and be like, Dave, let's just do whatever we want. Dave, let's just do whatever we want. And I thought, oh, I'm failing them. I'm producing antinomians and all these things. And then as time has gone by, the funniest things happened. And almost all of them are still
Christians.
Yeah,
amazing.
That's nuts. That's
or
statistically
they
nuts.
did go off and had a total, what you might call on the outside, an antinomian phase. I don't think it's really possible.
Mortification of their flesh.
Yeah.
They had a truly, wilderness period. They just went, but then they all of a sudden they show up at a Mockingbird conference. I'm like, what are you doing here?
Amazing.
They're like, I plugged back in 3 years ago and I never told you. And that happened. That's the experience of being 43 rather than 33. I've seen that, and I remember talking to a friend of mine who was part of a college small group, and he said, well, if that guy starts coming back to church, well, then that whole antinomian charge that you constantly are up against, Dave, I just know that finally definitively that it's complete nonsense. And I said, well, it's not complete nonsense, but however, then that guy that they were talking about who'd lived put it in everyone's face, how his debauchery, shall we say, all of a sudden he won't stop coming to church again. But this is like 10 years later. And I called up this other guy and he said, well, I guess maybe there is something to this grace thing after all. And I thought to myself,
Praise God. Yes,
I'm the best. I'm awesome.
Suck it.
Hashtag high anthropology. No, but I thought about it also in terms of, and this is like a closing thing to say, is that Todd Brewer on the website put up an amazing article called Preaching That Connects. And he goes through what he calls secularized Christianity, using Rudolf Bultmann's categories and saying like secularized preaching or secularized Christian preaching is preaching that is all about moral piety, or that's all about justice, or that is even all about catechesis and trying to pass on information. And he said this, he says, genuine preaching does not speak about God as spectator, looking on from a distance, but on behalf of God as an ambassador. The preacher bears the word of God and declares it as God's word for you. It strikes the hearer as a direct address in one's concrete situation. It must address the hearer in the life they actually live, the cares and concerns that confront them every day. The actual guilt the hearer carries with them and the good news of Jesus' life-giving grace, the real world in which one lives and from which one must be liberated. And that, I think, applies to children just as much as it does adults.
Can I say one
Please.
thing that's a thing that keeps hard in my brain? So I have this student who is actually the child of an Anglican priest, and he is the loveliest, and he's a music student at Rice, which we have, I think it's the number 1 or number 2 music school in the country, so it's super intense. And I mean, I think it's every time I preach, he falls asleep every time. And I don't preach long sermons. Like, as soon as he sits down.
Yeah, but you're a lot of things. You're not boring,
More
Sarah.
profanity.
I
More
know.
profanity, Sarah.
I see his eyes start to roll in the back of his head. Like, he's just like dozing. And I've had a couple of conversations with him where I just say like, hey, it's fine. You do seem tired though. So like, please take a nap. And I've also asked him to sit with, in a row, because we just have chairs. And so my main concern in the first couple of times this happened was that he was going to fall out of the chair and hit his head on the wooden floor. And so I have literally rushed sermons to go into the Nicene Creed so that he'll stand up.
Sorry, that's funny. Yeah.
But it's so comforting to me that he feels so comfortable there. Like, what I do know about him is he loves his parents, and he grew up in a church that he seemed to really love. And that was like, that seems to be the narrative. And so, there's nothing more beautiful to me than him basically missing my sermon every week because he's so comfortable that he just goes to sleep for a little while,
That's kind of amazing, actually. It's amazing. Yeah.
It is. I think it's like actually what grace looks like. Like maybe it's not, us saying things and them understanding it and then saying them saying it back. But maybe it's like a really tired college student feeling like it's okay for him to fall asleep during the sermon.
RJ, any final thoughts on All Saints Day?
No.
Come on, you always
really.
Bring the heat.
Not really.
Give us something.
RJ is not sad. He doesn't grieve, and he doesn't want to talk.
And he hates baseball.
I will say this, my final All Saints. I have absolutely no doubt that my father is with Jesus right now. And I'm a number guy. I do look forward to seeing him again, and then maybe the two of us will be able to express our love for each other there in a way we couldn't here. So there you go. That's my thought for All Saints Day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Well, happy All Saints, I guess.
I guess.
Happy All Saints.
Sarah, I hope everyone stays awake, though. Nonetheless, I still...
I don't got rules, so...
Praise God. All right, you guys.
Right,
at least
bye.
it's better falling asleep there than watching baseball, right?
Oh my God.
Okay.
All right.
Bring it full circle. All right. Love you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, bye.
Thank you for listening. Remember, you can find us on the web at www.mbird.com. And we'd always love to hear from you at info@mbird.com. Audio production for the Mockingcast is provided by TJ Hester. And if you like what you've heard, please drop over to iTunes and leave us a rating or review. Until next time.